What does it mean when someone can take a life and feel nothing? No regret, no fear, no hesitation. Just silence, a void where conscience should echo. Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 young men. He drugged them, strangled them, dismembered them. And yet, when asked why, his answers were unnervingly calm, not defensive, not proud, simply factual, as if describing something mundane. As if the horror lived entirely outside him. Have you ever wondered what truly drives a mind like this? Not in search of justification, but of understanding. Cold, clinical understanding of how such internal stillness can coexist with such external brutality. Dahmer's case has long haunted psychologists, not only because of what he did, but because of how he remained during and after each act. Composed, detached, disturbingly self-contained. Stay with me. The truths we are about to uncover go deeper than you might expect. Because in the quietest corners of Dahmer's behavior, we find the most chilling answers. And it begins here, with the silence that followed his first kill. That first act of violence wasn't chaotic or impulsive. It was deliberate, methodical even. When confronted later, Dahmer didn't describe panic. He described a strange calm, as if something inside him had finally aligned. Investigators were struck not only by the brutality of what he had done, but by the emotional flatness that followed. No racing thoughts, no trembling hands, just a sense that the act had happened. And now it was over. The absence of emotional consequence wasn't a mask. It was his baseline. And that changes the entire nature of the question we must ask. What happens when the inner voice that warns, resists, or regrets simply doesn't exist? If you value deep psychological exploration over easy answers, a like will help us continue unveiling the unseen layers of the human mind. And if you believe that questioning, not judging, is the path to understanding, consider subscribing to Criminal Psychology Unmasked. Here we explore, not excuse. Because to understand this silence is to step into the architecture of dissociation, a place where thought and feeling drift apart and action becomes mechanical. In Dahmer's mind, violence wasn't an eruption of rage. It was a process, stripped of emotional weight, driven not by hatred but by detachment. This emotional anesthesia is where we begin. Control wasn't just part of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes, it was the centerpiece. After his first murder, what followed wasn't a chaotic spree, but a methodical series of actions that repeated with unsettling consistency. He didn't simply kill. He drugged his victims, rendered them submissive, and then enacted a series of rituals that blurred the line between dominance and preservation. In one documented case, Dahmer drilled a hole into the skull of a living victim and poured acid inside, attempting to create a zombie, a compliant, breathing presence that wouldn't leave him. When questioned later, he said, "I wanted to keep him with me. He wouldn't leave if he couldn't think." These weren't spontaneous decisions. They were rehearsed acts meant to eliminate resistance and maintain possession, not of a life, but of a body. Each of these behaviors reveals more than cruelty. They expose a fragmented identity struggling to fabricate connection through control. Dahmer photographed his victims at various stages, posed them, kept bones, skulls, even organs. These objects didn't just symbolize power. They were anchors in a reality he couldn't emotionally connect with. During his trial, he spoke with a calm that chilled the courtroom. It was my way of remembering, a way of feeling like they were still there. What he couldn't experience through authentic emotional bonds, he tried to simulate through physical remnants, a distorted ritual of intimacy built on absence. The complexity of this mind doesn't end here. Beneath each calculated step, there's a deeper revelation. For Dahmer, murder was not only about ending life. It was about manufacturing a static world where no one could abandon him, reject him, or act beyond his control. And to achieve that, the ritual had to be repeated, controlled, perfected. Now let's go even deeper into this fractured mind. One of the most disturbing revelations in Jeffrey Dahmer's own words came when he described committing his crimes as if he were watching from the outside. This wasn't metaphorical. It was a glimpse into a psyche disintegrated, a man no longer integrated with his own actions, navigating the world from a detached inner void. In multiple interviews, Dahmer spoke of moments during the murders where he felt like an observer, emotionally numb, almost anesthetized from the weight of what he was doing. "It was like I was on automatic," he said. "I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel anything." This emotional absence isn't just chilling, it points to a deep psychic fragmentation. The decisions he made weren't born of heated impulse or psychotic delusion. They came from a place of emptiness, where empathy had long ceased to register. During his court testimony, one line stood out among the rest. "I didn't think of them as people. I saw them as things, parts I could keep." That statement alone strips away any illusion of shared human experience. It reveals a mental state where identity, both his own and that of his victims, was blurred, distorted, or erased. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover. This dissociation didn't protect Dahmer from guilt, it postponed it. After his arrest, he spoke about waves of remorse that came not during the act, but much later, when the silence returned and the distraction of control was gone. It was in those moments that the reality of his actions briefly reached him, and he found himself staring not at the world, but at his own internal abyss. The complexity of this mind doesn't end here. To understand Jeffrey Dahmer's psychological architecture, we must confront one of its most disturbing mechanisms, the complete objectification of the other. In his own words, Dahmer admitted that the killing wasn't the ultimate goal, possession was. After murdering his victims, he preserved parts of their bodies, skulls bleached and displayed, genitalia stored in his freezer, Polaroids carefully arranged and catalogued. These were not trophies of conquest, but symbols of frozen connection, an attempt to retain what he could not hold in life. In one of his confessions, he stated plainly, "It was my way of keeping them with me, a way to never lose them." This need to reduce a person to a physical remnant reveals a mental world stripped of mutuality. Others did not exist in Dahmer's internal narrative as independent identities. They were extensions of his loneliness, props in an emotional theater he controlled. During the trial, one detective testified that Dahmer spoke about building a private altar from human remains, a place of power where he could feel complete. That altar was never finished, but the idea alone exposes a ritualistic internal logic, a dark transformation of identity, both his and theirs. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover. These acts weren't driven by sadism in the traditional sense. Dahmer rarely inflicted pain intentionally. Instead, he drugged his victims into unconsciousness before acting, as if removing their awareness somehow justified his. This detail matters. It suggests that his need was not for dominance through suffering, but for possession without resistance, for people who would stay exactly as he needed them to be, silent, still, unchanging. Now let's go even deeper into this, into a dimension where desire loses its relational core and becomes something solitary, still, and emotionally severed. Jeffrey Dahmer's sexuality was not defined by mutuality, intimacy, or shared experience. In his own words, he admitted that the actual killing was a means to an end. That end was possession, but it was also a specific kind of gratification, one that required stillness, silence, and complete lack of resistance. He described arousal not in response to seduction or connection, but to the inert body, to the absence of life. In a chilling confession, he stated, "I didn't want them to move. I didn't want them to leave. I just wanted to keep them the way they were." This wasn't necrophilia in the conventional, sensationalized sense. It was the physicalization of emotional detachment, a desire so removed from human contact that the presence of the other, in any true sense, became irrelevant. In multiple instances, Dahmer waited until his victims were completely unconscious before engaging sexually. This pattern wasn't about cruelty for its own sake. It was about eliminating unpredictability, emotion, and response, all of which required confronting the reality of another human being. For him, desire lived in isolation. The other was a vessel stripped of voice, agency, and self. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover. Dahmer's disconnection wasn't just directed outward, it also consumed his internal identity. He once admitted that after the act was complete, the pleasure faded almost instantly, leaving behind guilt, disgust, and emptiness. These brief moments of clarity suggest that his pursuit wasn't for satisfaction, but for relief from the unbearable dissonance within himself. A relief that never truly arrived. The complexity of this mind doesn't end here. One of the most unsettling elements in Jeffrey Dahmer's psychological profile was his ability to simulate normalcy with disturbing precision. In the quiet corners of his apartment building, neighbors described him as polite, reserved, even shy. He offered sandwiches during casual encounters, exchanged brief pleasantries, and maintained the appearance of a solitary man simply keeping to himself. What they couldn't see, what no one saw, was the dissonance behind that mask. Bodies concealed in acid-filled drums, bones inside drawers, and photographs cataloging the disintegration of others. This duality reveals a chilling truth. Dahmer didn't need to act warm or charismatic. His emotional neutrality, his affective flatness, worked in his favor. It rendered him invisible. A man who displayed no agitation, no outbursts, no erratic behavior didn't attract suspicion. This mask of controlled detachment became a tool, a kind of camouflage that allowed him to continue the cycle undisturbed. During the trial, the prosecution played a recorded interview where Dahmer explained how he avoided detection. "I learned to keep my thoughts to myself and not draw attention." That wasn't just a tactic. It was the embodiment of his internal world, self-contained, silent, sealed off from connection. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover. This performance of normality wasn't driven by fear of being caught. It was necessity, the surface tension that kept his constructed identity from collapsing entirely. The mundane routines, the part-time jobs, the quiet nods to neighbors, they weren't just disguises, they were lifelines, thin threads holding together a crumbling inner architecture. Behind the soft voice and passive demeanor lived a psychological void, expanding with each act, each silence, each lie. Now let's go even deeper into this final fractured layer. When Jeffrey Dahmer spoke about his crimes in interviews and interrogations, what startled many wasn't just the absence of remorse, it was the clarity. He recounted details with near-clinical precision. No confusion, no hesitation, no emotional disruption. In one of his most cited interviews, he said calmly, "I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. It felt like a part of me had died long before any of this began." This wasn't delusion. It was lucidity wrapped in emotional emptiness, a dangerous combination that forces us to question the boundaries of sanity. During the trial, the court was torn between two interpretations. Was Dahmer legally sane or irreparably detached from moral reality? He never denied what he had done. He didn't blame hallucinations or external forces. On the contrary, he explained his acts with internal logic. "I knew I was taking lives," he said at one point. "I just didn't feel like I had another option." He recognized the consequences, yet seemed untouched by their emotional weight. It wasn't confusion, it was comprehension without connection. Dahmer often spoke of the silence inside him, a persistent absence he could never fill. He wasn't chasing ecstasy, but fleeing a depthless void. His destruction of others wasn't just about dominance or desire. It was about manufacturing a momentary escape from himself. And as he described these moments in cold, ordered language, one could sense it. This wasn't a man at war with reality, but a man existing beside it, narrating the collapse of his identity like reading a report. without urgency, without pain, without self. If this reflection resonates with you, right below, the mind hides more than we dare to see. Understanding a mind like Dahmer's is never about arriving at answers. It's about sitting with the discomfort of the unknown and learning to recognize the silence between cause and consequence. If this kind of exploration speaks to you, consider subscribing to Criminal Psychology Unmasked. Here, we don't rush to label, we pause to examine, to question, to go deeper. Right below, there's always a deeper origin. Your reflection adds to the weight of this conversation. And if you believe that serious, respectful analysis of the criminal mind deserves space in this world of noise, a like helps us continue this work, quietly and with intention. But even the darkest patterns we observe today didn't emerge by chance. Every distorted thought, every fractured emotion has roots that stretch deep into the past. In the next episode, we'll step back into the early chapters of this story to uncover how this mind was shaped layer by layer. So if you want to understand not just what he did, but how this mind was shaped from the beginning, join me in the next video where we'll uncover the early fractures, the silent triggers, and the home where the monster began to form.